I would like to call our meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the City website. Other individuals and media may also be audibly and/or visually recording the meeting. Clerk, yes?
Sorry, we were just double-checking quorum to make sure,
Right.
because councillors are kind of all over. Thank you.
Thanks, kindly. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to non-audible function during committee meeting. Madam Clerk, are there changes to our agenda?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, no, there are no changes to the agenda today.
I please have a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Whitehead and Eisenberger, all in favor? Carried. Carried. Thank you. Enthusiasm. Declarations of interest, colleagues. I see no declarations of interest. 3.1. May I please have a motion to approve our January 19th, 2018 minutes as presented? Councillor Marula, Councillor Green, all in favor? Carried. So, main item of the day, 5.1. I would like to call upon Debbie Delvedove to provide the presentation respecting transit budget overview. Ms. Delvedove. Welcome and thank you.
Okay. So, good morning, Deputy Mayor Johnson and members of Council. I'm proud to be here today to share with you the 2018 Transit Day budget presentation. First, I wanted to take a moment to introduce my management team. As you may recall, in August, we restructured the HSR, and I want to make sure you know each of the current managers. So, Jason Vanderhyde, Manager of Planning and Infrastructure. Mark Williams, Manager of Operations. Dennis Guy, Manager of Customer Experience and Innovation. Nancy Purser, Manager of Support Services. Mark Selkirk, Manager of Fleet and Maintenance. I'd also like to recognize George Brovac, who's the Manager of Special Projects. Before I formally begin my presentation, I wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank the women and men of the HSR who, despite the challenges they are faced with daily, are committed to our customers and the service we provide. I've been with the HSR for approximately 16 months now, and I can tell you that in my 30 years working in the transit industry, I have not seen staff with the same level of dedication to our customers. I've also not seen the kind of appreciation customers show to our staff. When I am out riding the bus to engage with the operators and customers, so often I hear customers saying, "Thanks," as they leave the bus. This simply doesn't happen everywhere. While our operators are the face of the HSR, I would be remiss if I did not also acknowledge all the maintenance and administrative staff behind the scenes that support the operators and the service we provide. This morning, I'm going to start with a look back at HSR with a brief recap of our 2017 accomplishments, and I will provide some comparison with other GTHA transit agencies to show you how HSR measures up. Provide a recap of the 10-year strategy and the first 2 years that have already been implemented. I'm going to take you through year 3 of the 10-year strategy and our operating budget, and then speak to you about the priorities and initiatives we are looking at the year in front of us. Finally, I'm going to provide a brief operational update on the issue of cancelled service, so you have the latest information on that as well. As I said, I'm going to begin by taking a look back and with a bit of a recap on HSR's performance. This slide shows you a number of HSR's accomplishments in 2017. It was a year of change and renewed focus for us in transit, as we started our shift toward delivering the best customer service experience we can and identifying where our opportunities for improvement are. As I mentioned, we aligned organizational structure to better support our service and are moving toward a much more customer-centric model for delivering transit. Just want to point out a few highlights on this slide. We delivered 865,000 hours of service. That equated to 16.5 kilometers, which is a lot. And to put it in perspective, we traveled to the moon and back 21 times. We carried approximately 21.4 million customers. Our revenue came in at approximately $40.5 million. Our revenue cost ratio, which represents how much money we take in from the fare box towards our operating cost, is almost 47%. As part of the launch of the Mountain Climber pilot project, we carried more than 700 cyclists up and down the Jane Mountains Road escarpment access. We also installed approximately 2,100 security cameras across the fleet, improving the safety and security of our customers, operators, and our equipment. And we've started implementing projects under the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, or PTIF, which, as you'll remember, this council supported with an investment of $36 million, resulting in a total investment in transit in Hamilton for $72 million. So how does the HSR measure up? The Canadian Urban Transit Association, or CUTA, is the association that tracks stats for all transit agencies from Canada, across Canada. We rely on CUTA and the stats they collect to help us benchmark and determine how HSR is performing relative to other transit agencies. We look to other transit agencies serving areas with similar populations in the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area, or GTHA, to compare our transit services. We are looking to Brampton, Durham, Mississauga, and York Region to help us determine how does HSR measure up. However, I do want to mention to you that there is not an exact comparator, as every transit agency is unique. We all serve different populations, have different service levels, and different geographies. No one else in the GTHA has a mountain. We use these comparators from the GTHA to see how we are performing relative to our peers. This slide shows you a quick snapshot of how HSR compares in a number of different areas measured by CUTA. You can see that HSR has the lowest average fare, is the best in cost per revenue hour, which is essentially the cost to put a bus on the road for an hour. We provide the second most trips per capita, which is the number of trips each person that lives within the urban transit area takes in a year. We provide the second most trips per revenue hour, which is the number of people we carry on average, overall the hours of service we provide. We are third in revenue per revenue hour per capita, which isn't a bad thing. This means that people are using the service that we have out on the road. Finally, of our comparators, we have the third highest revenue cost ratio, which is essentially the return on the fare box. This slide is showing council investments per capita, and these numbers represent council's investments for residents living within the urban transit area. As you can see, in 2006, council invested approximately $58.50 per resident within the urban transit area. That number went up by 13% between 2006 and 2013 to $65.89. For the most part, this represented investments that just kept up with the cost of living adjustments. To this council's credit, investments in transit have increased 40% in 2016 to $92.19 per resident. This graph shows similar data to the last slide as it relates to council's investments per capita, but it includes data from our comparative transit agencies. You'll see that we are just within a few dollars of York Region and Mississauga. This slide shows the number of times people who are living within the urban transit area use transit every day. In 2006, our rides per capita were 48. We saw a decrease of 6% between 2006 and 2013, and we saw another decrease between 2013 and 2016 of 3%. This could be for many reasons. We see population growth in Hamilton in suburban areas where HSR either doesn't service or doesn't service frequently. Declining ridership across Canada and North America may also be a reason, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that in my presentation. This graph shows how HSR measures up in trips per capita. You can see that while our trips per capita are declining, they are still very high in comparison to our neighbors. We see Brampton and Mississauga increasing, but both of these municipalities have populations growing at a very quick rate. As a reminder, we base our fares on the adult ticket price. Currently, we have the lowest fare among our comparators. Also just want to point out that these numbers are the current fare prices. As you can see by this chart, 70% of our customers are adults which is why fares are priced based on the adult ticket price. I'd like to remind Council, as part of the 10-year transit strategy, our focus in year 1 and 2 was to reduce pass-bys and improve on-time performance. Council's $6 million investment resulted in an additional 66,301 service hours across the city. To achieve this, we added 50 FTEs, which consisted of 3 operators, 8 maintenance staff, and 9 administrative staff. And we also added an additional 25 buses to our fleet. The focus of year 3 of the strategy will be to apply our service standards, and years 4 through 10 we will be focused on modal split and keeping up with the growth of the city. Given our investment to address capacity and reliability, we saw some initial improvements. The trending up is a direct result of the service cancellations we experienced throughout the end of 2017 and is impacting all the routes where we targeted our service improvements. On-time performance is defined as a bus being no earlier than 2 minutes and no later than 5 minutes. Our target in this area is 90% for on-time performance. Investments from year 1 and 2 saw initial improvements regarding on-time performance. It leveled off around the end of 2016, and due to canceled service we experienced in the fall, you are seeing a bit of a decline toward the end of 2017. Going to shift gears a bit now and give you a picture of HSR today. A lot has changed in the transit world since the development of our 10-year strategy back in 2014, including what is happening with our competitors and, more importantly, the options available to our customers' travel choices. Sobe bike rides are approaching 1 million rides. The availability of Uber and more recently Lyft. We have car share, community cars, carpooling. Also, it is important to note that telecommuting impacts our ridership. Technology has also made alternate transportation options more appealing. In general, ridership is flat across Canada. At the time we built the 10-year transit strategy in 2014, we had just experienced our highest ridership numbers. We did not anticipate that a nationwide decline was on the horizon and has yet to recover. CUDA is doing research to try to identify the reasons behind the decline in ridership and are on track to publish a report in May of 2018 detailing their findings. We are looking forward to this valuable information. The 10-year strategy includes an annual service review, and our service standards feed into that annual service review. We look at 5 items. We look at coverage, which means we want to plan our service so that 90% of residences and workplaces are within 400 meters of a bus stop in the urban transit area. Span simply means the times we are operational during the day. Frequency is pretty straightforward. This is how often a bus passes a stop on a certain route. Productivity speaks to boardings per hour. And I just want to clarify the difference between boardings and ridership. Ridership we count when a customer gets on and pays a fare. Boardings are how many people actually get on a bus. Our target for boardings per hour ensures that we have available a room on the bus. Loading is a measure of how full the bus is based on seating and standing capacity. We consider this alongside productivity and frequency to see if we need to add more buses before we are leaving someone at a stop because there's no more room on the bus. We use our service standards to feed into our annual service plan. Once the review has been completed, this, along with input from internal and external stakeholders, is sought to bring refinements to the proposed improvements and initiatives from the 10-year strategy. For 2018, or year 3, the main focus of the 10-year strategy is to ensure service standards are applied appropriately. This slide outlines what resources we require to implement year 3 of the transit strategy. It will require 5 additional buses, which were purchased as part of the PTIF Phase 1, 26 FTE, 20 of those are operators. Cost in 2018 for the 34,000 hours, keeping in mind that we put service on the road in September, is $1.815 million. The full cost is $3.4 million. The following 3 slides provide you with a list of where the 34,000 hours will be added.
And Debbie, sorry, could I make a request that you slow down slightly, just because it's a ton of information for
Sorry.
the group to synthesize?
I'm sorry.
So just a slightly slower clip.
Okay.
Thank you.
My apologies. So we will be improving the service level on the Delaware, the Upper Wellington, Upper Wentworth during weekday rush hours. These improvements will fill gaps as a result of applying our service standards. And more improvements to fill gaps as a result of applying our service standards. So as a reminder, at the inception of the 10-year strategy, year 1 and 2 were funded. The remainder of the strategy, which identified $300 million of capital requirements, did not have a funded source. Since then, the PTIF was announced and Council approved investments that took advantage of Phase 1 to purchase the capital required, which were 16 buses, in order to allow us to move forward with years 3 and 4. Years 5 through 10 remain unfunded. However, Phase 2 of PTIF may allow us to fund future remaining capital aspects of the 10-year transit strategy. We are awaiting details of how the funding of Phase 2 will roll out. Also, as part of the 10-year strategy, there was an approved fare increase. September 2018, we will be looking at a 10-cent fare increase, which is relative to the adult ticket price, as well as another 10-cent fare increase in September 2019, identified in the strategy. I also just want to remind you, after 2019, the fare increases will be relative to the cost of living. As a reminder, as per the 10-year strategy, every year we do the annual service review, which I already mentioned in the previous slide. As we continue to move through the 10-year strategy, one area we will be focusing on is engagement. When I speak to you about engagement, I'm talking about the voice of the customer. There has been a lot of focus on fix the HSR, and we want to understand from our customer's perspective what fix the HSR means. We also want to reach out to our stakeholders in 2018 so that we are able to plan out the subsequent years in the 10-year strategy. In regards to where this is relative to the transit strategy, years 2019 through to 2022, focus is to grow service and add in the modal split component of the plan, focusing on getting people out of their cars and onto transit. What's important to understand is that transit planning is a long-term exercise. For perspective, from the time we identify that we need to put service on the street, it takes approximately 14 months for us to get a bus. We need 5 months to recruit and train new operators. We require a minimum of 3 months to make service improvements a reality. And currently, we only have 3 opportunities in a calendar year to add service based on how operators sign up for their work. Also, looking forward, we are preparing for LRT. There are 2 aspects that we are preparing for. Number 1 is how are we going to manage service during construction of the LRT to ensure we are moving people through the corridor efficiently and effectively. And 2, when the LRT is complete, that our system is appropriately connecting with the LRT. The map shows the number of HSR routes impacted by major road segments along the LRT corridor. So in summary, this is our operating budget request for 2018. It shows an increase of 10.3% from our 2017 budget. What's driving this budget request? The main driver is the year 3 of the 10-year strategy, which is approximately $2.188 million. This number also includes the 3 FTEs that were associated with the PTIF Phase 1 projects. The DART's increase is a result of the additional trips in 2018 Presto increase is the result of year one of the 10-year operating strategy. And finally, $1.738 million are employee-related costs. This slide shows that we are budgeting for an increase in DARTS trips of approximately 42,000 additional rides in 2018. Continuous improvement and data-driven decision-making will inform everything that we do. Number one is our customer experience. Our target is to deliver 99.9% of our scheduled service. Talking to our customers, as mentioned previously, to understand what fix the HSR means, retaining our existing customers, and attracting new customers to build our ridership. Employee experience is another priority. We will continue with our Denison initiatives and begin our action planning once the results from our people survey are released. Before we get to questions portion, I do want to provide you with an update on the service disruptions and canceled service we have been experiencing in late part of 2017 and early 2018. So earlier this week, I sent out an information update to Council outlining some of the details about the service disruptions HSR customers have been experiencing in recent months. This graph shows the total hours of canceled service from January 2017 to date. My management team and I have been working to implement a number of changes to reduce the amount of canceled service, because our goal is to get out 99.9% of service every day. As you know, Council approved the transit-specific complement control policy in early November, which allows HSR to exceed the budgeted complement for bus operators by up to 12%. This policy helps us ensure we have enough operators available to drive the bus each day. At this time, we are actively increasing the number of bus operators we have. We have brought on 12 new operators and currently have 8 more in training, plus we have 4 more classes of 8 to 10 new operators that will be training in March, April, May, and June, which will bring HSR to a point where it is fully resourced as per the approved policy. This is expected to dramatically reduce canceled service and overtime expenditures. In the meanwhile, we have made a number of other adjustments, including organizing our schedule to allow for several spare operators each day, making changes to the way our operators request their days away from work. We are paying close attention to the data and trends as they relate to scheduling. To that end, we are recruiting for an attendance managed administrator who will be key in helping to identify trends in absenteeism so we can be proactive in our approach. As part of HSR's public awareness efforts, we published an update in the Spectator, our local Hamilton community newspapers, in View magazine, and on board all HSR buses. The update thanked customers for their patience and let them know the steps we were taking to restore service. As well, we have extended the hours of coverage on @HSR Twitter channel to between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. to ensure customers are able to get information about their bus routes. HSR is working closely with staff from corporate communications to implement a communications plan that, in tandem with restoring service on the street, will help to rebuild our customers' trust and confidence as we grow transit in Hamilton to a place where it better meets the needs and expectations of our customers. The plan includes ongoing updates to customers regarding service disruptions, reminders of investments Council has made in transit in recent years, and information on HSR's service operations and more. Thank you.
And I will turn to my speakers list. First up, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Debbie. Debbie, I'm glad you gave a slight history there in terms of where we've been with transit investments. Earlier in the year, I received communication from someone who lives in another area of the city and inquired about why Council was undertaking transit cuts. And I informed them that, in fact, we've consistently made investments in transit since, I think, 2005 was the last year where transit's budget actually was decreased. And those numbers are from Mr. Zagaric that were provided through last year's presentation, and they're not part of today. And with those numbers since 2005, almost every year consistently the transit budget was increased, sometimes twice the rate of inflation, and I think there was a year or two where, you know, it was around almost 6% for a couple of years. So that's probably triple of what the cost of living was during those years. So I think it's important to know where we've been with our investments in transit before we start to discuss where we're going. And you've highlighted and talked about the 10-year plan. And again, so with this consistent theme of making investments in transit, we did push the pause button in terms of not making cuts, but we certainly didn't go ahead with enhancements. Can you clarify again the first and second year investments and then what happened in year 3? I think you had 1 or 2 slides that pertain to that issue.
Yes. So for years 1 and 2, the dollar investment in the strategy was $6 million. We added, just want to check my notes. So
Yep.
Yeah, let me just find the slide. Sorry, just bear with me for 2 seconds. Oh, sorry, it's on this slide. Number 13. Okay, so $6 million investment and resulted in over 66,301 hours of additional service across the city, 50 FTEs, and additional 25 buses.
That's great. And this year's investment will be, again, that you highlighted.
So so total investment annualized is $3.4 million.
Okay. And I know that we've had discussions. Certainly, my conversation with the constituent again who lived in a different part of the city was around. This is all coming about in the context of us directing our staff to come in at 1.5%, 1.8%, 2% increases in transit during those years where we've been fairly consistent with very nominal budget increases. Transit's budget has come in almost double and sometimes triple those budget targets. So to be clear, this year's percentage as a percentage of budget would be what, Debbie? Was that part of the presentation as well?
So the ask is 10.3%. The specific levy impact, I would have to defer to Mr. Zagaric for that number, if that's the number you were looking for, Councillor.
Is that the question?
It is.
So perhaps we'll go to Mr. Zagaric.
So through the chair, as Debbie suggested, the annualized impact operating is 3.4, which would be about a 0.4. I would just remind committee over and above that 3.4 operating is an additional 3.4 for capital financing to support our contribution towards PTIF for a combined approximately $6.5 million contribution in 2018. Split between operating and capital, and that would represent about 0.8%.
Okay, thank you for that. And how does that compare then to the other directions that we've given other departments? So the budget ask, and I think you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Zagaric, you noted in your presentation last week that all departments, save and except for Public Works, had met our budget target. And how would this budget then for transit compare to that corporate budget target that we've asked all departments to come in at?
So through the chair, as the councillors identified, last Friday I advised council in terms of council's direction to departments with respect to the 1.5% guideline. All departments met or were below, are reporting below that 1.5% with the exception of Public Works. If you look at the Public Works divisions, controlling for transit, excluding transit, Public Works would be presenting a 1.5%. The drivers in Public Works, that brings Public Works above that 1.5% are transit, conventional transit, as Debbie's identified, the additional investments for the transit strategy, as well as the PTIF, as well as DARTS. You may recall in the presentation last week, there's a a increase in DARTs that is both inflationary as well as, I believe, an additional 44,000, about 44,000 trips that is budgeted for in 2018. So as it relates to the drivers, budget drivers for 2018, transit, both conventional and DARTs are factors that are contributing to Public Works exceeding that guideline.
Thanks for that information, Mike, and thanks, Debbie, for the responses, because I think it's important, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinion, and they can certainly interpret the information any way, which way they choose. But, you know, the facts are that we've consistently, since 2005, double or triple the cost of inflation and made investments in HSR. And I think, to be clear, and to reference another one of Mr. Zagarik's phrases, housing and transit have been sort of the two corporate favorites when it comes to budget, because they've consistently received a lot of support from not just staff but council as well. So thanks for clarifying that. I do want to speak to the issue of ridership numbers, and I read a very interesting article in the Toronto Star, I think it was last week, and it referenced some of the creative and unique things that TTC is looking at, because their numbers have been consistently declining, I think for 4 or 5 years in a row. And I just wonder whether or not, and they, you know, in that article they talked about ride sharing and actually the TTC being a part of that movement. And I'm just wondering, through you, Mr. Chairman, Debbie, whether our own HSR is looking at some of those unique trends that have been occurring within the transit area, if we start to include the Ubers of the world, and another phenomena that we can sometimes attribute maybe some of the declining ridership to. Are we looking at some of those unique service opportunities, if you want to call them that, in terms of keeping up with the new trends and new demographics, not just here in Southern Ontario, but across North America, where we've seen declining ridership numbers?
Through the chair, absolutely. We have been looking at all avenues in regards to what we can do to address the first and last mile problem, and I don't mean it's a problem, but, you know, how do we get people to our services? You know, for a long time in transit, it was all about just taking the bus from your beginning of your trip to the end of your trip, and people are finding other ways that they do want to get to us or to get to where they're going. There's been a bigger push too in regards to people walking and cycling and physical fitness, so all those things are impacting us, and we are looking into every avenue and what other transit agencies are doing, not just across Canada, but in the U.S. as well. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there is something that's been tried and is proving to show results, then we are absolutely looking at all of that.
All right, thank you for that. My last question, Mr. Chairman, is we last year talked about making the investment in the passenger counting system, and I know that there are some early results in. My fear last year was that if some of the assumptions we had made in the past surrounding our passenger counts were too optimistic or higher than what was reality, we would then suffer on the gas tax side of the funding equation that is set forth by other levels of government. So I'm wondering whether those early results yield different than what we had thought over the last number of years, or whether or not we have we're consistent with the numbers and some of the projections that we've used in the past to determine what we're eligible for as it relates to gas tax.
Through the chair, so our automatic passenger counters, or APCs, as we went through with the updates, I can tell you as of December the 22nd, we have 228 of our vehicles equipped with the passenger counters. They are similar to a virtual turnstile. So we are now seeing, we've worked out our hardware issues that we had with the equipment. We've worked very closely with the vendor in regards to the accuracy of the reporting of the information that's coming out for that. We are now seeing results in the range of about 98% accuracy, and that's specific to, so when the passenger counter says that this bus picked up 50 people, that we're 90% accuracy that at the end of the line it's showing that 50 people left the bus. So that we've worked out that part of it. Jason and his staff now are drilling down to the next level, which is down specific to stop location and what we are boarding people. And again, it's on boardings. This isn't a ridership indication, so the information that we do get from ridership, the additional information we'll be able to garner from the Presto usage specific around ridership. The combination of both of those will inform our decisions as we move forward and what that looks like.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Debbie, for the contextual information that so often is needed, and certainly look forward to putting it on my website. Because there are activists out there that like to paint a different picture, and I'm tired of reading that this council does not make investment in transit, and I've actually went on a radio station and challenged that premise based on what you just identified in the last number of years. So I appreciate that too, just to confirm this council is committed. My first question I need to ask, because the last time you and I talked, we talked about the real-time app, and you had suggested that you were hoping to have it come and play in January. It is January, and I know that many of the transit users that I talk to are just waiting for this to happen. Can you give us an update on that?
Absolutely. Through the chair. So I did provide an information update, but I'm happy to speak to where we are with the mobile app. We were hopeful that in January we would be able to launch the mobile app, but as with every technology, as you go through the project, issues are identified. We've been working closely with the vendor in regards to that, because we want to ensure that when we launch this app, that we are the one true source of information. So we want it to be accurate, we want it to be reliable, because for those reasons you mentioned, Councillor, our customers depend on that, and we don't want any instances of them looking at it, and if we don't have everything lined up from the back end. So we are projecting to have that app launched in May of this year, and that's our projection. We're hoping to come in before that, but that's where we are in that. If you'd like some more details, I'm happy to ask Dennis Guy to give you some more.
I think it's more a macro, just letting the community know that there'll be yet another very instrumental tool that could be utilized by the riderships so that they can better anticipate timing and in real time know where their buses are. So I appreciate that update. The next question I have is, over the last while, there's also been a cultural shift, certainly a shift in the usage with students. When you take a look at high schools and closures, greater distances traveled, it is putting additional ridership on our bus services certainly at peak hours for those schools. And then you throw in the fact that Mohawk College now, the students have universal bus pass, and they're charging an arm and a leg for parking on the site. They're really trying to encourage more people to take public transit. By doing that, they've also put a lot more pressure on those transit systems that do those routes. And the constant complaint I've received is from students that they're late for classes, and it doesn't matter what time they leave, and anticipating. I was looking at the chart that you put up there in regards to future investments, and you know more better than I do what those routes are. But I would think that Mohawk, I didn't see it there, is one of the routes that a lot of people are getting bumped off of. So help me understand, have we actually sat down with the users from Mohawk College and then maybe the users from some of the high schools that are heavily relying on and putting the pressure on the overloaded buses to understand what their needs are, what the actual routes are predominantly being taken, and how we can improve on that?
Through the chair, I'm going to ask Jason to speak about the strategies that we're enlisting and as it pertains to as we look at our routes. I do want to just point out to you that Jason started as an operator with the HSR approximately 15 years ago, Jason? In 2000, sorry, so 18 years ago. And what brings the uniqueness to what he offers in the role as the manager of planning and infrastructure is his frontline experience and understanding of the routes and what, where people are moving throughout the city, how they're getting there, where the opportunities are for efficiencies. So he brings to the planning world a unique combination of operations experience and planning, which in my experience in 30 years has always been strong operation, strong planning, but to have those two essential skill sets as we plan out our services is a rare combination. So maybe, Jason, if you could answer Councillor's question. Thank you.
Sure. Through the chair, part of the strategy for 2018 and the added service that would benefit students is introduction of some enhanced service on the A line, which specifically goes into Mohawk College. What we're looking at is increased frequency during the peak periods from 30-minute service down to 20-minute service, and then actually introducing base service throughout the midday period because, as we know, students are traveling at different times, classes are starting and finishing at different times. And in addition to that, for McMaster University, there are some enhancements we're asking for in terms of connecting McMaster through the West End and going up Wilson Street into the Meadowlands area, which would then connect to the east-west mountain buses that feed into the Meadowlands as well. In terms of high schools, one of the challenges we face on a daily basis, we do put high school extras out, but in the rash of cancellations over the fourth quarter of 2017 and the start of this year is that the school extras are an area where cancellations are happening on a regular basis, and that's due to the fact that we have a reliance on staff to come in on overtime and sign those pieces of work to facilitate that service, and quite honestly, we haven't gotten consistency out of having enough volunteers to do that service. So we're trying to focus our efforts on the main service, and the cancellations we've seen certainly towards the end of 2017, and what we're seeing as we are decreasing our cancellations in the start of this year are kind of landing on those school extras, which then puts stress on the regular service.
I appreciate the Ward 8 having Westmount, St. Thomas More, Sir Al McNabb, 3 high schools. I can tell you that a lot of the complaints I'm getting are from parents in respect to their children getting on time to the high schools. I know it's very difficult because the only time you need that service is, again, at that peak hour in the morning and that peak hour in the afternoon, and then you really don't need that level of service throughout. So I know and appreciate the challenge of driving those, but clearly that's a deficiency that it continues through the base of complaints that I've been receiving. The next question I have is, when we look at these projections and additional riding service and that, currently, as I understand it, the funding is basically around 47% fare box and 53% levy. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
In the business analysis, enhancing hours and so forth, has that analysis been done in regards to what impacts going forward will have on that current ratio?
So through the chair, so at a high level, initially when you introduce additional service or new service, that additional service until the ridership builds on that does impact on the revenue cost ratio because you haven't attained the ridership that you're anticipating on that particular route. So as the ridership builds, then the revenue cost ratio will come more in line because you are now supplementing the cost of the service with the money that you're getting out of the fare box.
So we'll see some fluctuation in that current ratio as a result of this plan?
Through the chair, there will always be fluctuation in revenue cost ratio.
Appreciate the last question. So you've got the counters in. You said you had 228 counters. You had to iron out the bugs. It's 98% accurate. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
So it's my understanding that a lot of the plans that have been implemented have been based on the actual physical accounts on ridership. So I'm trying to understand if you're building plans around that in absence of now the electronic passenger counters. Help me understand, have we determined the differential in regards to routes and ridership that were counted physically versus now using these counters, and what is that differential?
So through the chair, we're not quite there yet with the information. So as I said earlier, we've now got it to a 98% accuracy in regards to what it's reporting on how many people have gotten on the bus and that the same amount have left the bus. We are now in the process where we're drilling down to get that level so that we can have that information as it pertains to where the ridership is, where people are getting on and off our vehicles.
I appreciate, because I like to see reported on that when you're at that stage, because part of our plan was built on the foundation of what counts pre-existed, these new counters coming in play, and I think it's had a role in regards to some of the strategies that you have put forward, and I just want to ensure I understand the differentials, if there are, in those numbers. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Councillor Partridge.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And Debbie, thank you for the presentation. I do have a few questions here, and I understand that transit is your world, but when you're speeding through all the information, it would be very helpful, certainly to me, I can't speak for the rest of the folks, to have a bit more of an explanation. So if you could please go to slide number 13. Appreciate it. Thank you. So in looking at this, 2015, 2016, focus capacity and deficiencies, and then of course, you've gone to 2018 and 2019 to 2024. Could you just unpack this a bit for me? Did you meet the targets for 2015, 2016 capacity and deficiencies? Were all of the boxes checked off, or is there still work to be done there?
So through the chair, we still have some work to be done in regards to those issues. So when we were planning out the 10-year transit strategy and looking at what routes and where the opportunities were, this is a fluid process as things go along. So in this year of the strategy, so year 3, we will still be looking at some of those deficiencies. The impact of the cancelled service obviously has change those numbers towards the last quarter of 2017, but we are still, it will always be a constant look at, where are we not meeting our customers' expectations and where are opportunities to, provide the service more efficiently and reliably.
I appreciate that explanation, Chair, because when I looked at this and I thought, oh, wait a minute, with all the missed buses, are we not, now that we're heading into 2018, going to be looking at that if it was only done in 2015, 16? So, because it is a big issue. Yeah. 2019 to 2024, focus modal split and growth. Can you just unpack modal split?
So through the chair, so modal split is basically out of all the rides that somebody takes within an urban transit boundary area, it's the number of rides that they're taking on transit. So currently we are at approximately 7 to 8%, where our goal is to get to 12%, and that's getting people out of their cars potentially and onto transit. So that is looking at building out the BLAST network and providing higher order transit from the perspective of, instead of local service, potentially express over local, whatever those initiatives are, to provide customers what they're looking for is direct, reliable, and efficient way to get to where they're traveling.
Thank you. And Chair, I think that's a nice segue into a couple of months ago or a month ago when I had a meeting with yourself and General Manager McKinnon, and we were talking about the current grid of bus delivery and pickup and service as it is now. Do you feel it's the most efficient process or service delivery for our residents, or should we be looking at doing something different?
So through the chair, I know you've heard from Dan, that we are going to be looking at some route rationalization in regards to the design of the entire system.
Right.
So we are embarking on looking at that. The important key in that is obviously, where are customers going and where do they want to go across the city. So we need that part of the puzzle to determine, where are those travel patterns. Right now, all our service comes to one point in the lower city and then spreads out from that particular location. And, is that where everybody wants to go, and are we getting people, to where they want to go as directly as they want to go? So we are looking at everything in regards to not only the level of the service, but, is the system supporting where our customers want to travel throughout the city?
And what's your time frame on gathering that information and actually, bringing something back to council for a decision?
So through the chair, we're looking at it currently right now, and I certainly can come back to you once we have a plan as to when we will have something to bring forward.
I think it's really important, Chair, that we put a time frame around this because it isn't working. What's happening right now? We're hearing it from residents out there throughout the city. And, I think General Manager McKinnon, Chair, would like to chime in here, if I can put it that way.
Pardon me, Mr. McKinnon.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. So no different than a lot of other areas in public works, we're hungry for data. So one of the things that the APCs is going to help us is to have real data that we can rely on. There's other opportunities to get data from other locations. The Transportation Tomorrow survey is going to help us with that as well. And we're going to work in conjunction with McMaster through the Institute of Transportation and Logistics to help develop what a future plan might look like for the routes for transit and other areas of the transportation network. So we're kind of at this moment where we're just on the cusp of starting to get a lot of this data that will really inform a really comprehensive plan going forward. So we're hoping to make some progress on that throughout this year, but certainly the data from the APCs, once we can get the back-end software straightened out and we can get some intelligent information out of that, that's going to help inform this plan, which hopefully we'll be able to update and get moving before the end of the year.
Thank you and thank you, Chair. I'm a deadline-driven person. I like to have beginnings and ends. So, data is extremely important. You can collect it for years and not do much with it. So I'm hoping that, I'm hearing this year, and hopefully by the end of the year, 2018, you hope to have some information. So I hope that means that you'll be coming back to council late 2018 or 2019. Does that sound reasonable, Dan?
Mr. Chair, that definitely sounds reasonable.
Okay, thank you. And Debbie, if you could please go to slide 13. Sorry. Slide 14 and 15. Okay. Actually, slide 14, sorry. There you go. Could you just explain this slide a bit for me? And the next one as well.
Okay, so through the chair, the 4 lines represent the 4 areas within the city where we concentrated our service improvements in that regard. What the number on the left is telling us is how many times that we left people at a stop. So they weren't able to get on the first bus and potentially the second or third bus.
Okay.
So as we improve the service and address those deficiencies, instead of waiting till the second or third bus, they were able to get on that first bus.
What are the numbers at the bottom?
Oh, sorry, those are the years and the months. At the bottom, the 2015, so that's December 2015 right through to December of 2017.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And on slide 15?
So again, the number on the left is the percentage that we were on time. So and again, the parameters for on time for us are no more than a bus being no more than 2 minutes early or 5 minutes late. So the percentage of the time that we met that threshold. And again, the 4 lines represent the areas in the city where we concentrated our service improvements specific to the 10-year strategy. So as you can see, just for example, on the far left in December of 2015, if we look at the line at the top, which is Cross Mountain Suburban, approximately 82, almost 83% of the time we met that on-time performance. As we address the deficiencies and improve that, the graph goes up to probably if you look at, I'm saying January of 2016, 2017 approximately, we were almost at 87% on-time performance.
And then it dips down again.
And then it dips down, and the trending at the tail end is a direct result of the canceled service that we were experiencing.
Okay, and so on all routes, by the looks of it, across those areas where you were concentrating, it improved and did reasonably well, except for the mountain to downtown, and then they all seem to dip down a little bit. So an explanation of a slide like this would be really, really helpful when you're going through the presentation.
So through the chair, what I can do, Councillor, is I can provide these two slides to Council with an explanation to walk you through that so that you could have that for your reference to understand that. I'd be happy to do that.
And I appreciate that, but these explanations are also, more importantly, for our residents who are watching the live stream and who are present here in council chambers. Although there may not appear to be many, I still think it's important information. Slide number 25, please. Okay, so this one I really would appreciate if you'd go line by line and just give an explanation.
Okay, so through the chair, so just as the overall chart shows, and I just want to be clear so that everyone to remind Council, years 3 and 4 of the transit strategy, so the funding source for that was PTIF Phase 1. The remaining years, from 5 to 10, at the time that the transit strategy was adopted, there was a $300 million aspect to that strategy that we had no funding source for. With the announcement of Phase 2 of PTIF, we're awaiting the details on how that funding program is going to roll out, and it's a source to fund the remainder of the capital as identified in the transit strategy. So if we go line by line, when we look at hours, those numbers, 34, 39, are the number of service hours that we are going to be putting into service in that year. The annual operating dollars is what it's going to cost to put that service out on the road, and that's for the entire year. So just to recap, typically through the budget process, once the budget is approved, we put service in September, so those costs in that year are only from September to December, and then the subsequent year is when we realize the entire cost of that service. Full-time equivalent is strictly FTEs, how many FTEs we're going to need to put that service in, and then the next line is the fares.
And that's a fare increase?
Yes, and that would be on the adult ticket price. 10 cents. Oh, sorry. So currently our adult ticket price is $2.30 in September of 2018, provided that we receive approval to implement year 3, it would be a 10 cents fare increase.
And that would bring it up to, I'm sorry?
$2.40 for an adult ticket.
Okay, thank you. And carry on.
So then we get into the operating. So as I said earlier, we put service in typically in September. So in the year we put the service in, the annualized amount, so let's look at year 3, Councillor, is $1.815 million. So that $1.815 million in 2018 comes from September to December. And then the next year, that number would be annualized for the entire amount, which is approximately $3.4 million in 2019.
Okay, okay. That's good.
So is that okay?
That's a better explanation. Thank you. And again, I just, it's much more clear when we have the opportunity to have more explanation. Not everyone around here may need that, but I do. I'm just trying to find make this my last question, although I do have a few others. On page, slide 31, please. Slide 31, when you look at the bottom, between 2018 and 2020, if I add that up, that's a 32% increase. That's massive. Am I reading that right?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, does anybody else seem to think that's a little bit high, 32% increase? Yeah. That's my question. Yeah.
So,
Never mind. I just think 32% is high. I'd like an explanation for why, but...
So through the chair, you have to look at the entirety of the slide. So if you look at 2017,
right,
we're delivering 709,721 trips on DARTs at an average cost per trip of $22. If you fast forward to 2020, we're now at 846,116 trips. So based on when we forecast ridership on our specialized transit, we take into consideration how many registered customers we have, how many times they travel with us, what the cost per trip is at the time. And again, this is a forecast based on how we plan it out. So that increase is the cost of delivering those additional trips on DARTs.
And does that, Chair, since it's DARTs, it raises the question, and I know Councillor Jackson has raised this before, about the new DARTs buses that have been purchased. So is that included in these amounts here, or is this operating only?
So through the chair, when we come up with an average cost per trip, it's all in. So it's the cost of the vehicle, the dollars to operate the vehicle, everything that costs, that all costs in regards to the average cost per trip.
And that includes, Chair, the increase in the number of buses, the capital cost to purchase the new buses?
Through the chair,
all in.
All in.
Okay, thank you. And just on that, can you just touch on very quickly, and this is my last question, if you could just touch on quickly, we did have some issues with the purchase of the new DARTs buses, some information, emails had been forwarded to yourself, and I know Councillor Jackson as well, just about the issues from the long-term care facilities throughout the city that have been experiencing difficulties with their residents being able to get on and off these new buses, and the trip hazards and the accessibility issues with having to maneuver the steps that are inside these buses. How are we going to resolve that, please? And that's my final question.
So through the chair, we are working currently with DARTs in regards, and the manufacturer in regards to the concerns that are being brought forward in the design. There are opportunities to have different layouts within the equipment, and as this is a new vehicle we're introducing into our fleet, as with every new vehicle, things that you can maybe not anticipate in regards to that. We did go to the ACPD and show them the new vehicles, but it's like anything. It's a new piece of equipment, and as we work through it, there are opportunities to address those issues with the manufacturer and with DARTs.
Thank you very much, Councillor Partridge. And you're right, we do need to hear this complex information elucidated. It is helpful. Mayor Eisenberger.
Thank you, and excellent presentation, Debbie, and I really appreciate the management team that you put in place. I think it really speaks to getting a handle on the operational requirements of our transit system and the challenges that we face currently, and certainly ones that are coming up in the future. So thank you for a great presentation, great slide. One of the questions I have is about payment, and we talked about Presto Card the other day. That what we didn't talk about, which is fast upon us, is the ability to pay by phone. That's certainly something that's coming quickly in many areas. In fact, you can pay for a lot of things by phone today. And I watched, Amazon store the other day, where you walk in with a phone and you walk out and everything's paid for, and you haven't really gone through a turnstile or a checkout. You've just took your phone and shot the UPC code, and it registered, and as you walk out, it tallies it and then takes it out of your account. So I wonder, are we foreseeing the future in terms of payment, and how the phone might be, obviously for an app, very useful for knowing where the routes are coming from and where the buses are and when they're arriving and how they're arriving. But payment is also an area that is fast becoming, an option for a lot of people. And it seems to me that everybody has a phone. Even though some might not afford a Presto card, invariably they have a phone. So is there any look at that technology going forward as part of the payment options?
So through the chair, one of the deliverables that were identified from our initial operating agreement with Presto was open payment. So as part of the new agreement that we have now entered into with Presto, that is one of the deliverables we will be looking forward. So that is the ability to pay for your fare on your phone. Now, not with your Presto card, but with a credit card, just like you would at any store. What has been a stumbling block to launch that technology is our equipment. So right now, Metrolink, our equipment is 10 years old, it's redundant, and we need the new technology. So Metrolinx has gone out, or Presto has gone out for an RFP, and we're at that process of securing a vendor for the equipment that will provide us that open payment option.
I guess that's the basis of my question: is are we preparing ourselves? Because I know that we're ticket-based and Presto card-based, but not necessarily ready for the kind of next generation, which is phones. So you're looking at that to ensure that when it happens, we don't have to transform all of our equipment all over again to be able to adapt to phone payment.
Through the chair, that is part of the operating agreement with Presto.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. You know what? I appreciate the investments that we're making, and you know what? I in part appreciate the critics of transit because they actually push us to improve our transit system and hone up on technology. There are some that are unreasonable and some that are very positive and constructive. So I really appreciate that they're pushing us along. One of the things that continues to bother me when I look at slide 34 is this huge anomaly, and we need to address this, I think, a little bit more specifically in canceled service this year. So my first question is, do we have a kind of a historical record of that kind of performance? I mean, I believe this is an enormous spike in this year. Historically, have we seen these kinds of spikes before, and have we determined the reason for it? Because obviously, knowing it exists is the challenge we have right now, and how do we fix it? Why it happened in the first place is probably a bigger issue that we might want to think about and talk about. So do you have a historical record of when and if this has happened before, or at least go back 5 or 6 years and tell us this has been the pattern, not unlike this graph? And this graph makes it quite stark, unfortunately.
So through the chair, our ability to put service on the road when we do not have an operator available is how we can mitigate the ability to put that service out. So currently, what we have available to us when we don't have an operator available is to rely on overtime. So when we don't have that overtime available, to mitigate that, then our last resort is to cancel service. So in this particular chart, the spike in October, we had no availability to mitigate the service or putting out the service in regards to overtime. So as long as we have the overtime currently before the complement control policy, that was what was only available to us, and that's why the numbers for canceled service here, I could certainly put on top of that, what it would have been had we not had the ability to access overtime to put the service out. So that is what caused the spike in October.
So my question is a little bit more pointed, Debbie, and I understand that part, fully understand, but why have we seen such a high rate of absenteeism? What's the cause for that? So we've got remedies in place, and we're seeing progress. So I'm seeing from the beginning of the year 71 hours of canceled service for the month, 1,830 in October. We're down to 646. So the steps that we've taken are having impact, and that's positive. What we want to ensure is that we avoid an 1,830-hour spike into the future. And so some assessment of, and if we need to go offline for that at some point, please tell me, assessment of why we've seen this kind of a spike and that rate of absenteeism absenteeism, I think would be relatively important as to why that occurred. I know the remedies. I understand the impacts from overtime and all the other issues. Any sense of what's causing that kind of high level of absenteeism?
So through the chair, we do have our highest number of operators currently that are on long-term disability. The job of an operator is very demanding. I know my staff make it look pretty simple when you get on a bus and they're just sitting there and driving a bus, but there are a lot of things on a daily basis that impact the job that they're performing. As an operator, you have to be 100% when you come into work. And I don't want you behind a wheel if you're not 100%, because it is a safety-sensitive position. So, over the years, there are a number of contributing factors that, cause people that they are not available for work. We also have, other requirements. People have babies, they go off on leave in regards to that, family commitments. So I think we need to look at it from the perspective of availability. So whether I have an operator available or not to put the service out on that day will decide whether or not I'm canceling service. We could certainly spend a lot of time discussing, what is the cause of, why people aren't coming to work. But it's, for us, from a service delivery model, is, if I don't have somebody available, how am I going to get that service out on the road?
Totally understand. So thank you. I'm on for the fix, and the first order of business for our transit operation is predictability and reliability, and if we don't have that, then we don't have the kind of transit system we want. And I know you're ardently working on that, but it's reliant on ensuring that our operating availability, or operator availability, is more in line with January than it is with October. And so I'm just going to take it offline with you and maybe get a better understanding, because it's important. If there are impacts that are happening on the driver's side that is causing them to not be at work, and it's vehicle related or whatever it is, then obviously it needs attention, because we want to avoid that kind of unusual spike into the future. So, I appreciate all the effort you're putting into making the change, and obviously we're seeing some positive impact, and hopefully we get back to a more reasonable, usual absentee rate that accounts for all the reasons why people can't come into work, whether they're having an operation or a child or family matters, whatever it is. That's normal and understandable. But certainly October is an anomaly that we can't have happen again. So last question for you, and I raised this probably at the capital side, but I'll raise it here just to remind. Electric vehicle acquisition into the future. I know we have a full fleet of gas and diesel, and we've made some significant positive developments on the natural gas side, which I think is positive on the short run. But ultimately, the future of vehicles in our community is going to be electric. That's the way the market is going. That's the way the vehicle efficiencies are going, and I think battery storage and all of those things are improving significantly enough that electric buses are available. I know they're being tried and tested in Toronto right now, and so where are we at on the notion of the electric vehicle procurement going forward?
So through the chair, I have my manager of fleet and maintenance, who has been investigating and the various electric technologies and keeping up to speed as to where we are with the equipment. As you noted, they're at the initial stages of testing the technology out there in a transit environment. So we are keeping a close eye on that, so that we ensure that when we take the step into that market, that we, for lack of a better term, most of the bugs have been worked out, so that it's proven technology that we can rely on, because it is a significant capital investment, and we want to make sure that the equipment is delivering what we need it in that regard. So we are closely monitoring what is happening in the industry.
Great, thank you. And are we contemplating any kind of a test ourselves, not unlike Toronto, in terms of a vehicle or a few to
So through the chair, Mark has been in touch with the vendors that have that type of equipment. So as they become available, absolutely, we would bring them in and test them. The vendors are very anxious for people or transit agencies to take those vehicles out and try them out to see how they perform in our conditions.
Great, thank you. And so as we're looking to build out another transit storage facility and maintenance facility, I would assume that we're contemplating electric charging stations into that mix as well, so that we're prepared as future electric vehicles come online?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Listen, I think you're doing a terrific job, Debbie. I really support the work you're doing and your team. I really think we're getting a better handle on managing the file in a more proactive, innovative way, and I really appreciate that, and a great presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Eisenberger. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I'll work my best to keep my questions as succinct as I possibly can, asking that the answers be the same. 5 minutes, I'll put myself on the second-time speakers list. So this budget is about planning, performance, and peak hours. We were tracking headcounts, and I know that was a big talk around peak hours and performances. Where are we in terms of the distinction between the fares received and the boardings in terms of how we're tracking headcounts to be able to plan predictably into the future?
So through the chair, could I ask you to repeat that one more time just so I can understand?
How are we counting the ridership to be able to plan predictably into the future?
Okay, so through the chair, I'll start it off and then I'm going to defer to Nancy as she could probably give you a more succinct answer. So I guess our greatest opportunity is with the Presto card to give us that exact specific information in regards to fares. And if I turn it over to Nancy to just explain, how we do that correlation.
And if I could, just to preface that comment, Mr. Deputy Mayor, when we hear about declining ridership, and when we had our conversations in the past years of council, we identified quite rightly and quite quickly that we didn't actually know who were on our most popular buses. The head counts were done manually once or twice a year without predictability and without accuracy. So we have here listed 21.5 million rides, 40 million roughly in revenues, and we know that with the students and with the folks that have mobility devices that are just walking on, people who have cards like myself, how are we tracking the actual numbers for ridership to be able to make the statement that we have declining ridership?
Through the chair, currently we don't actually have an accurate 100% count of ridership. It's based on estimates because we have paper passes that are just a flash pass. Most of our passes are flash passes, and so there's not 100% accuracy. We are utilizing the data we're getting from Presto to help us. The more we get, the better we can start extrapolating that information to determine what the real ridership numbers are. We are getting better data right now since McMaster University has moved to Presto starting in September. That is a very large group of customers that utilize our system. Through the Presto system, we'll also be able to tie that into which routes they are using to determine by route the ridership.
So just for clarity, we don't know that ridership is decreasing.
Based on our estimates and what is being purchased through our vendors, paper passes, paper tickets, cash in the fare box, based on our estimates, we're seeing that ridership is slightly, right now it's kind of flatline.
I can tell you that riding the bus daily, at least a third of the occupants that are coming on are not interacting with that in any way, but I digress. You have on slide 12, there's a pie chart outlining fares collected. You're talking about Presto, but Presto's not disaggregated in that chart. So where is the Presto passes in this chart?
Through the chair, Presto is just a mechanism to pay the fare. So when people use Presto, they're either paying an adult using an adult pass, or they're a single fare or a ticket. So it's all shown as the same type of fare, whether it's paper or Presto.
Certainly, though, with the digital, with a digital fare, you have the ability to disaggregate the difference between cash, ticket, and what is digital. So how much of this is coming from Presto?
Through the chair, currently about 25% of our customers utilize Presto.
I feel like that might be a bit of a disconnect from the report that we had on the Presto presentation, but I'll go back to that. We have here on slide 32 the pass-bys by month. Oh, sorry, maybe it's 35. Oh, no, back one, 34. Here we go. Is that, and then you have in slide 15 the highlight performance for schedule adherence. Do you have your service disruption in your performance adherence numbers? Because there seems to be a big disconnect.
So through the chair, those numbers that you saw on that graph are all included. Those are the actual numbers that we recorded. So it is included.
So October, November, December, if you could go back to slide 15. Visually, I can't see how that could be the case.
So through the chair, this slide is specific to the areas where we put our improvements and service enhancements as a result of year 1 and year 2 of the 10-year strategy. So this is not indicative of the entire system. It's just specific to year 1 and 2 of the transit strategy.
Respectfully, you can't count a bus that's been pulled off the service as being on time.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay.
So
it's 6 minutes. I'm going to take myself off and put myself on the second time speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Green. We move on to Councillor Pearson. And Councillor Green, do please click your button if you wish to speak again.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor and Debbie. Thank you. Excellent presentation as always. So please, certainly appreciate the amount of information that you've provided in the report as well. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, and just as we were going through, you mentioned about, it just might be a little glitch, the fare increases for 2018. We're saying it's a 10-cent increase on the adult cash fare, correct? Or on the adult ticket fare. Does the cash fare not go up as well?
So through the chair, so in the simplest of terms, so how we distribute an increase in our fares, we base it on the adult ticket price, and then we have a calculation based on utilization as to how we apply what is that equivalent in an adult pass and our other fare media.
Okay, so I guess on slide 26, maybe it'd be easier because we're just showing $3 and $3 for the current and $3 for next year as cash, but we're saying the adult ticket is going to go up.
So through the chair, that's correct, and I'm going to let Nancy explain the science behind how we apply a 10-cent fare increase across all our fares.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Through the chair, when we came forward with the 10-year strategy, we presented how we would calculate our fare structure. At that time, we stated that the adult ticket price or single ride would be our base fare, and everything would be calculated from there. So right now, the way it's done is a cash fare is treated as a premium fare, and it's 128% of the ticket price rounded to the nearest 25 cents, which is why it doesn't go up every year.
Okay.
Because of the rounding. Student ticket price is 83% of the adult ticket price, and a pass is calculated as an adult ticket to an adult pass is 44 times the ticket price, and a student pass is 44 times the student ticket price.
Okay. So that simplified it. Thank you so much. But it is also enlightening to understand how these calculations are done, not only just for us around this table, but the viewing public. So thank you so much for that clarification. I also want to ask, Debbie, you mentioned, just going back to previous speaker asking about the counters at the doors. Mm-hmm. So how do we activate and reflect what the users that come in the back doors? So you have a number of wheelchairs, the disabled that come in the back doors.
So through the chair, we do have counters at the front and the rear. I do not believe, and I'll let Jason speak to that it's a person going through, so it doesn't delineate whether it's somebody in a mobility device or not. But Jason, is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Super, thank you. And then hopefully I'm within time still. So you mentioned in your slides, a couple of places you mentioned about engaging the public. And before I ask about that, I want to thank Jason, because I think engaging the public is dealing with concerns and complaints that come forward. And Jason has been very instrumental in addressing an issue that starts out in Ward 10 but ends up with a connector bus at Nash for a number of residents trying to get to work. And there was not a connection in there, and he's actually made it work, and the residents are very happy, so I want to thank him for that. But how are we going to engage the public to address I guess what you're asking them to do is bring forward their concerns so that we can do more comprehensive review of what do people really want. Is that what I'm understanding?
Through the chair, that's correct, and I'm going to ask Dennis Guy to speak a little bit about how we are going to roll that out in 2018.
Through the chair, what we need to do at this point is put together a plan for a comprehensive way to allow anybody in Hamilton to bring forth their concerns, not just certainly what we've heard so far, but to broaden that. And yourself, Councillor Pearson, you may remember from our waste days how we were much broader in our approach, and that's what I would like to do now with transit over the course of this year anyways, with a series of events, series of consultation sessions and so forth. I think playing off of the session run by Environment Hamilton later last year, to take that and expand it with other community partners to get out there and ask the question of a much broader audience.
Absolutely, and I can just see being, say, at the transit hubs, because you don't want to catch people when they're running to get on the bus or rushing to get away, but trying to just be in the vicinity that you can gather some, comprehensive information. Is that basically an intent and something you look at?
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly from the target audience of current riders, we also want to take a look at people who are not riding the bus and look at what it would take to get them out of their car and onto the bus.
Thank you for that. And lastly, I just want to be sure, and Debbie, when you did your calculations, appreciate, and we see the numbers for DARTs going up, but we don't reflect that in our transit numbers, do we? The DARTs numbers themselves? Because we have two different lists, so I'm going, okay, transit is down, but we have a number of people who were taking transit, but now are taking DARTs.
So through the chair, I'm going to ask Jason to clarify that for you, Councillor.
Yeah, through the chair, they're separate.
So we do keep them separate, even though DARTs is going up, so we really should reflect that somehow. There should be an understanding that it does include, that's all transit. And I think you were getting to that point that we're creating a more comprehensive at some point, correct, Debbie?
So through the chair, are you speaking about the reorg and incorporating the accessible transit services right within conventional transit and treating all our customers under that same umbrella? So that is correct from that perspective.
Super. And then I'm assuming too, another thing that I'm not gathering is and do we reflect it? The counters reflect anybody going on the bus, but even if they don't pay. So a disabled who doesn't pay is also counted.
So through the chair, the automatic passenger counters do not gather ridership, so where somebody pays their fare. It's a virtual turnstile. People come on, people come off. We want to make sure that if a bus gets 50 people, that 300 people didn't come off in that same span of time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and Director Delvado, my apologies for being late. Had a couple of drop-offs to do, so I apologize for missing your presentation, but have just quickly scanned through the hard copy here. Debbie, just a few questions. So to the HSR ridership and to the DARTs, HSR basically, if I heard you and Nancy, it's either decreased over the last year or two and or flatline, just to confirm, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you. Is that correct?
So through the chair, we did see a decrease in ridership, so actuals to actuals,
Yes.
of approximately 87,000 rides from 2016 to 2017.
Lesser.
That's correct.
Less. Correct?
Yes.
On the DART side, we're seeing a tremendous increase. Within you and your team, and right now, by the way, which one of your managers, if you will, I know George Brovak's done a terrific job with ATS, but do you have one of your new managers assigned that oversees the DARTS contract?
Through the chair, that's correct. The management of the DARTS contract now falls under Jason Vanderhyde in transit planning and infrastructure.
So between you and Jason, can you try to reconcile for me the incredible increase that we're anticipating in DARTS ridership versus the decrease in our conventional transit? You or Jason want to take a stab at that, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
So through the chair, I'm actually going to ask George Brovak to speak to exactly how it is that we land on what we anticipate our riders are going to be on DARTS. There is another science to that that we use throughout the years to try to estimate what that is, because there are a number of factors in the accessible transit world, such as AODA, that feed into, you know, how we feel if there's going to be an uptake in the service and what's all involved in that. So I'll turn it over to George.
Deb, I appreciate that preamble, Debbie, and I'm willing to hear the science, but I want some professional opinion, if possible, as to why this is incredibly going upwards in terms of rides, which is good for our community that needs it, versus conventional transit that doesn't seem to be going in the same direction. So anyways, to you and George, please.
Yeah, so through the chair, when I said science, it's not maybe just science, but it's
fair enough.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, thank you, Deb. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you, please.
So through the chair, when we looked at revamping the way we handled specialized transit, we moved to smaller vehicles. We're measuring this on an annual basis, but we moved away from the big ARBOC buses, and we've moved to smaller vehicles, which we anticipated when we look at growth. We look at demographics, we look at the aging population, we look at what's called a trip multiplier, so it's an average number of times a passenger will use the service. We've estimated that that is going to grow as we move to smaller vehicles because, one, the ride is better. It's a nicer ride for a customer. Secondly, it's a lower capacity, so you're going to be getting on and off that vehicle at a shorter time frame than you would if you were on a bus that had a larger capacity. You'd be on there for maybe an hour, whereas with the smaller vehicles, you're going to get less capacity, which means more direct trips. So we're evaluating that. When we forecast, we look at that growth, that people are now going to travel more frequently if they can. We look at the actual number to say, did this occur? We can do that on an annual basis.
Okay. George. Okay. You're very knowledgeable. George, what I was trying to get at, well, first of all, you've raised the issue about the smaller vans, and you said, I think to paraphrase your words, was a much more pleasurable ride or some. So I got to challenge that at some point in light of the constituent feedback I've had and in consultation with other colleagues like Councillor Partridge, what they've been hearing as well, contrary. I'm trying to get at the fact that DARTS is going to see a massive increase in riders, and ridership versus our conventional transit currently that's going in the opposite direction. Can somebody give me some professional reasoning as to why? Is it simply that older population and many more people that are disabled in our community? Or I'm trying to understand versus conventional transit, and we're increasing the budget on conventional transit the last few years, capital, 29 new hires to come. That's the question I'm trying to get at, Debbie.
So through the chair, I'll take a quick shot at it, and then if I didn't get it quite right, George can clarify. So what is driving essentially the increase in our accessible transit usage is the AODA requirements. So those have changed in 2012 that allowed for cognitive and different seasonal usage on accessible transit. So that is the basis of why, and an old aging population. We are coming into the area of our baby boomers, and that is a fundamental driver potentially in regards to the increase in the use of accessible transit.
Okay. George, please.
An additional item through the chair is fare parity with specialized transit and conventional transit move to fare parity, which means in our case, 50% of our registered customers are 80 and over. And with that, they qualify now for a Golden Age bus pass. So if they are able and feeling up to it, they can travel for free as many times as they want to.
Right, but that should push them back to our conventional transit system, correct? If they're in the Golden Age category, or are they using the DART system under the Golden Age category? Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you.
So through the chair, they could use either. It's all about their ability to access the service, and whether they are able enough to get to a service stop and wait for a conventional bus.
Okay, Mr. Deputy Mayor, holy smokes, I'm way past my 5 minutes here. So could I please come back as a second-time speaker, because I have a lot more questions. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson, that's fine. I will click on Councillor Conley, who's our next first-time speaker.
Thank you. I do not have a lot of questions, but I was at the accessibility transit meeting, which I'm a member of, and I had a lot of seniors' homes talking about buses. And most of them like the idea of what we're doing. We're getting smaller vans and that, but they still feel the need that we have to have buses because they take our seniors out for trips to different places, and you can't have a trip with two people in it. So I'm asking you, would there be a movement to keep some of the buses? I don't know how many buses we have. They suggested to me at the meeting about 5 buses would probably complement what they have to do. Have you got any comment on that, please?
So through the chair, we are working actively with DARTS in regards to the design of the new ProMaster vehicles. There is an opportunity for us to redesign the interior to accommodate more wheelchairs. And we are also looking at how we are going to address the issue that you've communicated, Councillor, that is the concern of those homes. We are looking at a change in the way we're delivering service. We try to anticipate what the concerns would be and what would work well and what wouldn't work well. So we are actively looking at how we can address those concerns.
With all due respect, the ProMaster will not accommodate trips for outings that the seniors would like to take where they need 10 people in a bus or something like that. So I'm just asking you to don't get rid of all the buses yet. Make sure you do your homework, and if we can keep some of those buses for the seniors, I would really appreciate it, and I'm going to push it at the next meeting, whenever that is, on accessible transit. And our population is getting older. All these what do you call them? All the people my age are getting up there, the boomers, and accessibility is getting tougher. So I can see the numbers going up. If I can get a ride from home to where I want to go, rather than walk down to a bus stop and I've got bad legs or bad back or bad ever, I'm going to do it. In fact, I know people that they're not immobile, but they're getting there, and they have to use walkers or all this kind of stuff, and they could probably get to a bus stop, but they're taking DARTs. And I know people personally. So I can see the darts going up and going up as our society gets older. Till all us people pass away and let another group take over, expect that darts is going to have higher numbers than ours. And our numbers transit-wide, and I know I'm starting to just ramble, but North America-wise, numbers are down. It's not us, it's not Toronto, it's not anybody. Numbers are down, and I don't know how we're going to resolve that. And I really makes me nervous when we're getting an LRT in that expects to have high numbers to make it viable, and I don't think we'll ever see those numbers. Hopefully we do. I'm a little skeptical on that part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. We are now at second-time speakers. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'm not questioning the fact that the ridership has gone down. It'd be an anomaly if it isn't, because North America, Portland, Oregon, even in Europe, Belgium, one of the highest transit users, the numbers are going down because of the alternative, cycling, as you've identified, Uber, rideshare, and a number of other type programs. So I'm not even going to question that. I mean, how much has gone down is probably the real question. It's not as much as whether it's gone down or not. But I think there's some interesting questions. So let's be clear. On the darts, it's a door-to-door service. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
And 80% of the ridership that currently take darts, sorry, maybe I should ask the question another way. How much of the ridership on darts is program-based?
Through the chair, George.
So program-based is when they have to go to dialysis or like specific programs.
Through the chair, I don't have the actual percentages, but work school programs are our three main drivers.
Do you have any idea what the percentage of that makes up of the total ridership of darts?
Through the chair, I believe it's in the 70% when you look at what's available to casual, meaning a one-off person that wants to, a customer that calls in to get a trip. So I think we're running around 70% subscription where it's...
So I think it's important to distinguish that a large part of the clients on darts are actually using it to actually facilitate particular programs. Mm-hmm. And my argument's always been, and I think we talked about the fact that London, Ontario, now I don't know if that's still the case, but at one point they were actually providing some offsets to the transit system for the programs through the Ministry of Health, and yet in Hamilton, we're absorbing 100% of the dollars, even though it's a program-based access. The other question I have, because it's a door-to-door service, it is arguable that there is a percentage of those people, whether they, under the technical terms, can get on the bus, on the darts bus, could readily ride the transit system. Would that be an accurate statement?
So through the chair, that's correct. We do some travel training with our customers to acclimatize them to the conventional service. So instead of the entire trip potentially being on darts, to familiarize them with the conventional transit service. So we do actively do that.
Okay, so I think the question, if I was to sum up the question or understand the question, the rise on darts, has that contributed to the fall on HSR?
Okay. So,
I'm asking the question point blank.
So through the chair, I don't have that information today, but I would be happy to go back and do some analysis to see if there is any correlation to what you're asking, Councillor.
Appreciate that.
Sorry, I see a staff indication. Was there a staff member wishing to comment?
Through the chair. So our eligibility for specialized transit is, can you use conventional transit, yes or no? And we look at three factors: the environment the person lives in, the customer lives in, their cognitive and physical abilities to get to a bus stop. So We're not stealing customers that would be going on conventional transit because our eligibility is based on, can you use conventional transit, yes or no?
Yeah, and my understanding is that we grandfathered a number of people under a criteria that more than likely could take public transit, but being grandfathered on criteria. So I guess the criteria basically is, I mean, you're suggesting if you can take one, well, they're just going to check off no, and away we go, and you got no way of providing any evidence that they cannot. And then some are clearly not able to take public transit. So it is somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for, subjective. And the problem is it's really hard to hold the count if somebody just checks off, no, I can't, even though they might be able to. So the problem is that we're getting on the system people that prefer the door-to-door service, and that might be part of the challenge we're having on the significant increase in DARTs over and above some of the things you've identified. The integrated, I think this was touched on, integrated transit system. And what I mean by that is that first kilometer or the last kilometer issue. And you've seen other transit systems which was identified as looking at how they can bridge that to make the ridership on public transit more efficient and more enjoyable. But the biggest challenge is that first kilometer and last kilometer. And so that would require potential partnerships with our private sector providers, but at the public expense. But the overall benefit could be realized through more people on the public transit system. So basically, a person getting from point A to a destination bus stop or LRT stop, and then bang, they're into the public transit system. Has there been a lot of work, any concepts here in the City of Hamilton in looking at that, bridging that piece?
So through the chair, that is a constant, it's in the forefront of all transit agencies to solve that first mile, last mile problem on how to get to public transit. So we are just embarking through the work that we're doing in regards to our routes and trying to identify how we do solve that problem. And we are monitoring the trends out there, what other transit agencies are doing, as initiatives that they're taking potentially to resolve that problem in order to feed the transit system. So we are working with that.
Great. And the last question, and it actually dovetails on the first question on ridership. When you looked at Portland, Oregon, and they added 21 new kilometers of rail and transit and so forth, not only the ridership's going down, but they haven't met the ridership targets on 22 kilometers or whatever it was of expansion. So when we look at the expanded services, that we will be, we projected numbers, I would think, in regards to the business case. We projected ridership numbers on these extended hours that we've identified.
So through the chair, as the 10-year strategy was planned out, we did make assumptions around, the improvements that we would make for growth and modal split would result in an increase in ridership, which then directly impacts the revenues that we would take in.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So we've identified, I think, some key questions in the preceding speakers. I did have a couple more. Slide 7 identifies the council investment. And for all intensive purposes, I think it's important to note how that has been determined through CUDA. It's the old City of Hamilton, so these are assessments per capita, the tax of the old City of Hamilton, correct?
So through the chair, I am going to defer to, I'm not sure who would know whether or not those CUDA numbers.
Yeah, it couldn't certainly be through the whole municipality. I'll make the assumption, but I'd like to have it verified by staff, that the raising costs and investments in transit that are being borne by the old City of Hamilton taxpayers has gone up from $58.50 to $92.19.
So through the chair, we could do that analysis for you, Councillor, to...
Okay, I'll look at the asterisks right there within the transit urban boundary.
Right.
Okay, so that's area rated.
Through the chair, Nancy, sorry, Mike is putting his hand up. I don't want to give you misinformation.
So through the chair, just based on the reference below, and just because I'm not quite familiar with CUDA's approach, but assuming it is the City of Hamilton's transit boundary, that would be the boundary that we area rate transit for.
So we have a situation where, even notwithstanding the 58, which was regional, and it was duly noted here, but in 2013 from 6581 up to 9219, we're seeing this rise of the burden of the taxpayer in the old City of Hamilton. And I use that language in a specific way because I do believe it's an investment, but I think it's important to note that in the 10-year transit strategy, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we've heard different interpretations of it being delayed or paused because we didn't have the funding in place. And I won't ask you the question. I'll make the statement that if it wasn't area rated, we would have the funding in place and we would be able to deal with it adequately. But to go on to the next point, which is on slide 20, you have 26 FTEs. And we're hearing this often, that we've been making these investments in capital and it's adequate to solve the problem, or historically it's at a greater rate than our other departments. But I guess what I'm challenged for is what we uncovered in the last very passionate conversation around transit, is that the FTEs that we hired late in the year in September were not nearly adequate to cover the shortfalls that we had in the missed services and the requests for overtime and everything else. So is the 26 FTEs with the additional 5 buses, is that a net gain versus retirement and attrition, or is that also going to be keeping the status quo?
So through the chair, that would be a net gain.
So we're going to be having an additional 26 drivers?
Through the chair, yes. In order to put out those additional 34,000 hours, we need those drivers to operate those vehicles, so it is a net gain.
So to ask another way, the 26 drivers represent the 34,000 additional service hours?
Through the chair, just to clarify, it's 20 of the FTEs. That's the entire FTE complement. So 20 of those are operators, and it is a net gain in order to put out the 34,000 hours of additional service.
And I guess my question is the obvious question. We face a massive shortfall currently. So in your opinion, does 20 drivers adequately reflect the overtime, the extended hours of our retirees, and the missed services that we faced for 2017? So we've seen this now in 2017, these missed services, the requests for overtime and everything else. We're going to carry that on to 2018. We're going to add additional hours. Is 20 drivers enough?
So through the chair, so through the complement control, so we have three buckets, for lack of a better description. We have what we're identifying through the complement control policy. We have our requirement through attrition, so drivers that retire or leave, and then we have the requirement for the operators we're going to need for the additional service. So we have plotted out for the entire year in 2018 the first bucket to identify how many additional drivers we need to hire and to have on staff to get us to 12% as per the complement control policy. We also incorporate in our numbers for recruiting. You know, traditionally, we experience approximately 30 operators leave in the course of the year, whether they retire, decide to work somewhere else. So we've also incorporated the requirement for that number. And then in addition to that, in September, we will need an additional 20 operators if the budget is approved to put the service out. So we have done the calculations. We have, you know, based on when we're training, when they're coming in, and all of that. So we will have the adequate amount to satisfy the complement control policy, to satisfy our attrition rates, and to satisfy the requirements in order for us to put the service out in September.
The complement control policy, as I understand it, was put in place to backstop a crisis that we were facing. So in 2019, would you consider the total amount of drivers on the road to be adequate for regular hours versus the complement control, which we've brought in for additional hours? That's my last question.
So through the chair, that is, you know, that is
another way. In 2019, are we back on track and everything's back to normal hours? Drivers are operating in a sustainable way. We're not asking for the overtime. We're not asking for retirees to come back.
So through the chair, the short answer is yes. I do want to clarify, We will always have overtime, regardless of how many operators we have. It's just the nature of our business and when we experience operators that aren't available to do the work. So the short answer is yes. The complement control policy was put in place for the specific reason so that we never find ourselves in the situation that we found ourselves in the fall of 2017.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. So, Debbie, I have a couple more questions. If you could go to slide 4, please, very quickly. Right at the beginning. There we go. So on the top line there, it's got provided more than, under the DARTS trips, it says provided more than 673,000. Mm-hmm. And then if you go to page 31, please. It has total trips for DARTS, 709,721. So if I look at the number on page 4, which is 673, and I look at this number, which is 709,721, should they not be the same number?
Through the chair, and just to clarify, George, Jason?
Through the chair, the number represented on this slide is the budgeted number. And on slide, I think it was 3, it's the actuals, what was delivered.
Okay, so it doesn't say that. So that's the difference in the two, because the difference is 36,700 rides.
That's correct. The first slide that we saw was the delivered.
Okay, so the first slide was delivered. So this is what was budgeted, but not what the actual numbers. Okay, because the difference at 2224 is almost $1 million.
So through the chair, as Jason said, that was accomplishments in 2017. This was just some detail around the previous slide,
right,
which detailed what the drivers are for the 2018 budget. So the DARTS increase is the 1.680, and we are budgeting those amounts for the increase for the budget. So one was accomplishments, that's what we did, actuals,
right,
and this slide is specific around budget.
Okay, so the actuals actually came in lower. The actual trips
Through the chair, that's correct.
are lower than what was budgeted.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, and so what happens to the extra money then? So if your actuals are less than what you budgeted for, there should be some money left over.
Through the chair, I think George will take the question.
Through the chair, we'll be following up with a variance report which will outline everything. What happened with this screen here talks to projections as far as the service goes looking forward.
I understand that.
So actually what occurred was that we had a fleet transition that was supposed to take place and be completed by October, meaning DARTS was moving away from the bigger buses to smaller vehicles. That transition has been delayed mainly because their supplier for the vehicle had an order for 80 of these ProMaster vehicles from Toronto, and so they delayed the delivery of the vehicles that we require in order to accomplish that. So the assumption of a variance in a positive won't be expected because the transition to a lower cost vehicle didn't occur in 2017. So even though we're lower in trips, our costs didn't reflect that.
And the 2224, if I remember from the answer that I got previously, is an all-in cost.
Through the chair, that's correct.
That's correct. Okay, and when will we have that variance report?
Through the chair, hopefully within, I would say, a month. Usually we wait for the audited financials to come back from DARTS, but in this case, I think we'll provide an update sooner than that occurs.
Well, I think that would be appropriate, considering that it's budget time, and there's a significant increase here being asked, right, out of all the departments. And I understand within Public Works,
So this is a significant ask. So I would like to see that variance report come back as soon as possible so that we can deliberate on that. Through you, Chair, to Dan. What date would we be looking at, or approximately?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd want to kind of work through it with Mike, because if we don't have the audited financials, then we don't have firm numbers, but we can certainly see what we can do to accelerate that so that you've got all the information in front of you before you finalize.
Yeah, and I understand that, so thank you. I do understand that there needs to be some other processes followed before it comes back, but we are in budget. And I think that information is important. Thank you. I appreciate the answers.
We are moving on to Councillor Jackson.
Thanks for the encore, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Much appreciated. Debbie, as you're turning to slide 21, please, just a general question following up from Councillor Green. What is the status of the 29 hires and the 5 additional buses? What's the status of it? Are they in place? It's not pertaining to this slide. Sorry, didn't mean to mix you up. Back to that other slide about the 29 and the 5. What's the status of that, please?
So
are all the buses purchased? Are they all on the road? 29 hires, they've gone through their screening, tests, everything. They're ready to hit the road tomorrow. That's what I'm asking.
So through the chair, just so I'm clear when I answer you, you're speaking relative to year 3 of the 10-year strategy? The 29?
Yeah, the slide that you had up there that Councillor Green was referencing about the 5 buses purchased and the additional operators that I think was it 26 or 29 that you're hiring? That's it,
There we go.
26.
Okay.
I just the top 2 bullet points.
Yes.
Are they all in place on the road out there, or are we still a few months away?
Okay. Through the chair, so the 5 additional buses we purchased through phase 1 of PTIF. So we expect those to arrive in March and then have them ready for the service to go on the road in September. The 26 FTEs are specific to year 3. So once we get approval from the budget process, 20 of those will be operators and they will be hired, trained and ready to go so we can put the service out in September.
Oh, there's still a 6-month time lag before those because right now your cancellation rides, all the challenges, Debbie, I was assuming that if your 26 have done all their testing, been approved, and are ready as drivers to hit the road and be part of ATU, I thought maybe in April they would be helping the challenge of cancellations and things like that, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Okay, so through the chair, it's through the complement control policy that we are hiring those operators to meet the requirement under that. We have plotted out for the entire year at what point we need to have the drivers in training, have them trained and ready to go so that in September they are there specific for the service hours that will be increasing as a result of the 10-year strategy. So the short answer is yes, the operators will be hired, trained, ready to go in September should I get approval to proceed with year 3 of the transit strategy.
But not sooner for whatever logistical reasons or whatever.
So through the chair, through the timing, they might be on board potentially a month in advance of the service,
okay.
but not sooner than that.
Okay, since I'm halfway through my encore, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Debbie. Now to slide 21, Debbie. So Debbie, I look at 21, 22, 23, the enhancements. The meetings I've had with you, with the members of the executive of the McMaster Student Union, and Debbie, I'm feeling a little bit like the caboose here. I feel left out. If I recall, Mohawk 41 and Upper Kenilworth 21 were ones from the East Mountain where people were having a hard time connecting with the service and or the running times were much longer than their demand was. So help me I appreciate the ones you've put up here of enhancements. And that's great, servicing and expanding the system. But just wondering about Mohawk and Upper Kenilworth, please.
So through the chair, I'll ask Jason to give you an update, Councillor.
Okay, Jason, please.
Through the chair, and I think you may not have been here when I spoke to this earlier, but certainly to address those concerns that we've heard from you in conversation about connecting customers from your area to McMaster University specifically.
Correct.
We have made some enhancements to the Delaware route. improving the frequencies and during peak periods to connect with those east-west mountain buses that connect at the Meadowlands. So there is that improvement there. And in terms of Route 22, 23 in your area, the improvements are seen over the weekend on Sunday morning specifically, where we're increasing frequencies to your ward from 60-minute frequencies down to 30-minute frequencies.
Okay, maybe I focused on two of the particular bus routes, but you're saying there will be increase in service running times. Appreciate that, Jason, and maybe I was focusing on the Upper Kenilworth and Mohawk specifically and didn't need to, but just please keep those on your radar just in case I hear from my constituents further. And oh boy, I'm getting close to that finishing the encore time, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So slide 31, please, Debbie. Back to darts. So members of council always ask, where's the boards, agencies, when do they come in? When they're disconnect, they're distant from us, we don't see them from time to time. This is an annual thing for me. Is the darts general manager and board going to appear during this budget session? Because I have questions specifically for them, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through to Debbie and or General Manager McKinnon, whoever wants to answer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is no official kind of protocol for them to appear before committee. I guess they can make delegation on the day that we have dedicated for delegations and could present and respond to questions at that point. But as far as being part of the budget process, technically, because of the arrangement that we have with them, they are not part of it.
So, Dan, I understand, and I know that there's a subcommittee specifically of ATS that deals with the ongoing relationship. But this body of all 16 of us from time to time may have specific questions of darts. And again, on the issue of smaller versus larger, George, I have to challenge you based on my constituents' response that the smaller vans are more comfortable. I just want an opportunity to know.
Councillor Jackson, please continue. Pardon me, Clerk Paparella, I did not realize you were indicating. Please go ahead.
To you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just for clarification for Councillor Jackson, because they are a vendor, it wasn't appropriate to have them at the meeting as we don't have vendors attend during the budget process. The proper process for that would be to have them come as a delegation request on February the 27th, and I'm sure that Mr. McKinnon could pass that information on to them, that you would like them to attend, to speak, so they would attend on the 27th.
Councillor?
So do I have to formally move that, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so that the general manager will ensure that darts will attend, or can I leave that in Dan's good hands?
I wouldn't think so, but Mr. McKinnon can confirm. A need for a motion, Mr. McKinnon.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no need for a motion. We will definitely contact Mr. Mindorf and request that he appear on the 27th.
Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And specifically about the large versus small, pros, cons, I understand we signed a 3-year contract with them. We wanted them to save $1 million a year. He had to go to the smaller, but we need to understand the upside downside of what's happened there and the increased number of rides that DARTS is experiencing that unfortunately conventional transit is not. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Mayor Eisenberger.
Thank you. Just on the last point in terms of darts, and I was just going to point out that we, the last time we met as a council to deal with the darts changes in the ridership, we demanded significant savings from them on a year-to-year basis, and so they moved towards more cost-effective vehicles. And I understand that there may be some consternation about that, but it seems to me that they're being more cost-effective as we've required them to be. So I think it's rather right. We kind of got them in a bit of a trap, unfortunately, where we beat them up for making efficiency changes that we're demanding. Notwithstanding, the eligibility issue has always been the issue on darts. And so and it still is, and it probably forever will be unless we completely get it in hand. So as long as we have a door-to-door service at the same rate as our HSR, that folks can get access to, and I'm not even going to talk about need, because I think that the moment it seems to me that the moment they get on the service, there is never an off ramp on that, because they get it for medical reasons, and it seems to. I'm not sure if there's a process whereby once that medical need is no longer there, that they actually get on the service. So we're seeing climbing demand for door-to-door service at the same rate as our HSR. Fully understandable why people would access that, because it's convenient. And so how, at some point, the eligibility issue is the issue. And if we don't deal with that, then we're going to continue to see, an ever-increasing uptick in demand for that kind of service. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that, getting a DARTS vehicle to your door is particularly easy. I mean, it's not a simple process necessarily, but you can book and you can get that service door to door, and you pay the same amount you would pay for the $3 bus fare that you would have to take. I suspect, based on the 30% that Councillor Whitehead actually identified, that there are numbers of people that could quite easily go to the regular transit service and not access DARTS. I don't know what the number is, but if we're prepared to mitigate costs in future DARTS operations, it seems to me that at some point we have to deal with the eligibility issue. So I'm going to throw that out there. I know that we have the ongoing debate of inside and outside and independent agency. We've decided it's going to be an independent agency, so clearly they're not part of our budgetary process, but we do pay for the service, and therefore that's why it shows up the way it is. But be happy to have them come back and explain the efficiencies they've made. I see a lot of new DARTS vehicles out there that seem to me to be more reflective of the kind of service that we're delivering there. The complaint used to be that we've got these large, massive DARTS buses out there and one person in it going to a particular destination. So hopefully we get a handle on, what is it we really want in terms of future service, and start talking about the eligibility issues. Those are my comments on that. It's been a frustration, as long as I've been here, as long as Councillor Jackson's been here, the ongoing, debate. I think DARTS is doing a yeoman's work in getting this service delivered out there. I think the board works extremely hard to try and deliver what council is prepared to pay for. And I really appreciate the effort they're making. And, the original outset, DARTS was intended to be delivered to those that could not use our HSR, had no means of transportation to get to their medical appointments or their dialysis or all those kinds of things because they're disabled or for other reasons. I think in some measure, I don't know what the percentage is, we've gone much beyond that in terms of that level of service. So at some point, eligibility will be the issue. But having said that, again, I appreciate the presentation and well done.
Rula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start off by saying, folks, regarding DARTS, there is no other entity that deals with the city that's been as scrutinized as DARTS, and I've led the charge accordingly. And in all fairness to them, they're the only ones that actually report to council through the Accessible Transit Services Committee quarterly, which is included in your Public Works minutes, and also GIC and council. So I would highly recommend that you read the reports because they are quarterly reporting to us, and no other entity has to do that. So just if you want to maybe go back to your reports, they've already done it. Most recently, they came forward with their budget. We had delegations for the public. QP attended as well, presented their position regarding the budget, as well as their concerns. So I hope that helps. So I would be somewhat uncomfortable considering how much scrutiny they've been subjected to and how they've met each and every demand that we've made of them. And let's face it, I've given them a hard time over the years, but I'm at the point now where I understand that they're doing a yeoman's job considering how much they've been scrutinized. I would be very uncomfortable to invite them now again, considering they've already done their report to ATS and everybody was invited to attend. So just for future reference, mark it on your calendars or read your reports so that we don't have to repeat this type of a discussion in the future. Having said that, in clearing the air on the issue surrounding a 10-year plan and whether or not we cut or delayed the 10-year plan, just to separate fact from fiction, to you, Mr. Chairman, to Mike Zagarek, can you please explain the federal and provincial transit investment fund, how that played a role, or the delay in that money coming forward played a role in us not approving those funds? And how long did it wait before we approved the budget last year and those monies started flowing from an operating perspective? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
So through you, through the chair, I'll take some time and just remind committee in terms of the process, because I think it's we need to be mindful of the process that we follow with respect to the first intake, because I expect we're going to have similar challenges with the next infrastructure program intake. So you may recall August 13th, 2016, there was an announcement that the federal and the government of Ontario reached a bilateral agreement for infrastructure. We were told at that time, hurry, get your applications in, you have till October. So we had less than 2 months to identify incremental, and I want to highlight that. These were projects that were not previously funded in our either capital or operating budget. So we rushed, came to Council October 5th, less than 2 months, and Council ratified a list of transit priorities as well as clean water or wastewater priorities. We submitted those October 18th. Again, the desire was to expedite these projects in an effort to, in part, to address at that time some challenges with respect to creating employment and creating some benefits nationally. We then brought forward through the tax-supported capital budget December of 16 the opportunity or the financing scenario with respect to the city's contribution to the federal infrastructure. So half was to be funded from the city, half was to be funded by the federal government. So again, we got our applications in October, we rushed through that process, we brought it forward to you in December, and then we sat and waited. So from October to when we heard from the provincial government, who was the administrator, was almost 6 months. It was after you approved the 2017 budget process. So there's a disconnect with respect to these infrastructure programs and their timing with our budget process. You were not able to approve those projects, A, because they were incremental. So in order for the city to have proceeded, would have required you approving $72 million in local debt. And so in terms of the timing, the challenge was that it was outside of our budget process. So having said that, we approved the budget late March, early April with tax policies, and then we received confirmation April 19th. We came back with a financing report that you approved in April. So you did, in fact, approve the $36 million local contribution in 2017. The challenge was we didn't hear confirmation from the provincial and federal governments until after you approved the 2017 budget. And that is why 0.4% of this year's budget supports that $36 million contribution, capital contribution, as well as in Debbie's presentation today, there's the matching $1.8 million operating in 2018, and then the full annualized, I believe, is $3.1 or $3.4 million, the balance being in 2019. So I'm going to apologize because I'm going to go over 5 minutes here because I want to
take all the time.
Oh, no.
I'm going to relate this to our challenge going forward.
Mayor Fred is right. The rule does not apply to staff.
Take your time, Mike.
So here's our challenge going forward. We expect that we are going to hear in the coming months the next phase of the infrastructure program, phase 2. That will likely be formalized on April 1st of 2018. So we could be before this council with another transit infrastructure report and opportunity after April of this year. And that disconnect between their fiscal budget periods and our budget process creates some challenges for us. So again, that's something we are going to have to monitor and manage. As Debbie identified, is Council approved a 10-year transit strategy that was subject to, at that time, $300 million in provincial and federal funding. We will not be able to proceed with the balance of years 5 through 10 until such time as we have a sense as to what the provincial and federal contributions infrastructure contributions are going to be. So just for your appreciation and the appreciation of the citizens is there's always going to be this uncertainty with respect to the balance of the transit strategy, given that it is conditional upon provincial and federal funding. So I just leave that with you is one of the challenges we're going to have to manage is the timing disconnect. Now, are there opportunities? We hope that there's some opportunities. They've suggested I believe it's an $8 billion Ontario transit contribution. I also would just note that transit contribution is 10 years and it is back-ended. So if you look at the forecast, 30% of that funding is in the first 5 years, 70% of that funding is in the last 5 years. So something we need to manage is the fact that that funding is going to be back-ended in that 10-year period. Also, the other opportunity I'll leave you with is the provincial gas tax revenue sharing. Again, this government's committed. That's starting in 2019. If this government gets reelected, that they would be increasing the provincial gas tax. We are going to have to manage that as well in terms of that opportunity. So there's a lot of unknowns that transit staff are having to try to manage in terms of aligning the 10-year strategy. The biggest unknown really is infrastructure funding and the timing of that funding.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, you can say right now, Mike, that unequivocally, City Council did not cut or delay our 10-year plan.
So through the chair, I would describe it as you approved year 3 and the capital for year 4 in 2017. Was it deferred from when it was originally brought to you in December? Yes, but it was deferred because we didn't receive provincial and federal commitment until March of 2017.
So at the end of the day, to separate fact from fiction, I hope people can cut and paste what was just said, put it in writing, and keep it in front of your screen or at home on your office desk or whatever. Because I'm tired of fiction prevailing over facts, not only on this issue, but many. But this one here, particularly today, was an appropriate time to clear that air. I appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman, and that of Mr. Zagarri. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before we continue, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our great Hamilton Mountain MP and former Mountain Councillor Scott Duval, who I believe is currently critic for pensions, one of the most vital issues in the country. So thank you. Thank you for your service, and it's very nice to see you. Welcome. So, Councillor Partridge is on.
Very quickly, I just wanted to clarify that when I was discussing the new buses for DARTS, the issue came from a long-term care facility located in Waterdown, where when they have a number of residents to be picked up and taken to whatever it is, there's not enough room on a bus, so they need now multiple buses, as opposed to previously it was one bus that would pick them up. And the safety issue is with the long-term care residents tripping. And that is an actual incident that took place and one that we just need to be careful of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Eisenberger.
I move to receive the presentation.
Seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor?
Carried.
And back to my script. I think we're good now. Where is that correct? Are there any motions, colleagues? I see no indications. There's one motion to adjourn. Barnes, Skelly, all in favor?
Okay, thank you.
Good job, Deb.